Merry Christmas. This is Gordo, and boy, am I ever excited that it's Christmas time again. But where did the rest of the year go? You know, it seems like just a month ago that I was here in the studio making my last tape, and suddenly I look at my calendar and it's Christmas again. Can somebody explain how this happens? Not that I'm complaining. After all, this is my favorite time of the year. I find myself running around humming Christmas carols, shopping, and just generally getting into the spirit of the season. And you know, that's why I make these tapes. You see, I figure that if listening to this tape can put you in the Christmas spirit and make you feel even half as good as I do, then I've accomplished what I set out to do. There's just something magical about this season. Even if you don't celebrate Christmas, and I know that there's some of you who don't, you have to admit that something unexplainable happens during the holiday season. Well, people put aside their differences and are actually nice to each other. Even countries at war call a ceasefire, and it's like for one day the world exists the way it's supposed to. And for whatever reason you think that happens, I think it's cause to celebrate. And that's why I put a Santa hat on my head every year, crank up the Christmas carols to 10 on my Walkman, and sit down and make these tapes. And speaking of tapes, have I got a great one for you this year. This story comes straight from the big guy in the red suit himself. So without any further delay, it's time to gather up the kids, throw another log on the fire, and pour yourself a glass of your favorite Christmas cheer. Now turn up the volume and settle back, because live and in hi-fi stereo, this is my Christmas card. This is a story that Santa Claus told me last summer when I was vacationing at the North Pole, and it's a story about elves. That's right, I said elves. Now, I'm sure all of you have a picture in your mind of Santa's elves, happily working away at the North Pole, building toys. But there's a lot more to elves than that. And I understand that, unlike myself, very few of you have ever had the opportunity to actually meet an elf in person. So maybe I'd better start by telling you a little bit about them. Now, of course, everyone knows what an elf looks like. Even if you've never actually seen one, well, you would know that they're all short. Only about 3 feet tall, in fact. And they all have pointed ears and furry toes. But other than that, they're just like regular everyday people. Well, there's black, white, and brown elves. There's men and women, grown-ups and children. And besides being the best toy builders on the planet, elves work as doctors and lawyers and accountants. Basically, any job you can think of, there's elves who do it. But above all else, the most important thing to remember about them is that all elves are good. Always. There's just no such thing as a bad elf. They don't exist. In fact, to even use the word bad in the same sentence with the word elf would be like, I don't know, comparing dogs and cats. But that's not to say that all elves are always happy and jolly. In fact, I found that most of them are just a little bit grumpy. But for the most part, elves are okay to be around once you understand them. Now, another very important thing to know about elves is that while they're very hard workers, they should never be trusted to work alone unsupervised. In this way, they're a lot like young children. You see, elves don't always think things through completely, and left on their own, they can create more problems than they solve. Now, of course, Santa knows this, and he tries to personally oversee every department in his workshop. But unfortunately, this is becoming increasingly more difficult as the workload at the North Pole grows. In fact, in recent years, Santa has even had to call in elves from all over the world to work as temporaries during the Christmas rush. And with inexperienced elves, there's always a potential for disaster. Now, believe it or not, one of the most important jobs at the North Pole is in the mailroom. It is here that every letter addressed to Santa Claus ends up. Unfortunately, Santa doesn't have time to read each letter personally. Why, he would never have time for anything else if he did. So he relies on the staff in the mailroom to read each letter and report to him what everyone wants for Christmas. And needless to say, the number of letters arriving at the North Pole has grown considerably, and many of the temporary workers that Santa brings in end up in the mailroom. Now this is a story about a couple of those temporary workers and the near catastrophe they created last Christmas. It was a late December night, only a couple of days before Christmas, and the graveyard shift had just come to work in the mailroom. Well, there was a small mountain of mail in the middle of the floor waiting to be read, with the promise of more arriving in the morning. And Prudence, the postmaster elf, was in bed with a cold. That meant that the graveyard shift, which in this case consisted of two elves from Brooklyn named Hector and Oscar, would have to work unsupervised through the night. Santa, who was exhausted from a long day of work, was giving them their final instructions.
Okay, boys, I'm counting on you. Prudence, the postmaster, is sick, and we really need to get all of this mail read by morning, so no fooling around.
Oh, don't worry there, boss. Santa, you can count on the two of us here.
Absolutely. Hey, we're the hottest workers you got. You'll see, we'll do you a good job.
That's
I
right.
hope so. We've had a lot of mistakes around here lately, and I can't afford any more. Oh, I'm going to get some sleep. But you call and wake me if you have any problems.
Sure thing.
Night, boss.
Good night.
Say, Hector, did you bring that thermos of coffee with you?
You don't need any coffee there, Oscar. Come on, you heard what the boss said. We gotta read all these letters here.
Yeah, I know, but geez, a cup of coffee won't hurt nobody. Just hand me some of them letters.
Dear Santa, I have been a very good girl this year. Please bring me a Barney doll and a Super Mario game and a Betsy Wetsy and a computer.
Now, probably the hardest thing about working in the mailroom is not becoming personally involved. Besides having to read what everyone wants for Christmas, you get to come across some pretty wild stories. That's not to say that we all beg when we write to Santa, but some people have been known to grovel just a bit. And a few of us, and I won't mention any names, have even resorted to telling Santa Claus some real whoppers. And then, of course, there's always more than a few legitimately touching letters. And for the person doing the reading, the only way to handle it is just read the letter and write down what the person wants. That way, Santa can decide who's really deserving and who's not. Getting personally involved with every letter would be the worst thing you could possibly do. Unfortunately, nobody gave Hector and Oscar this piece of advice. And after 4 or 5 hours of reading letters, they were becoming emotionally drained. And that's when they came across the letter.
Hey, Hector, listen to this one. Dear Santa, I am
I'm
writing
writing
you
this
this
letter to give you directions to my house. My mother and father say you'll probably not be able to find it this year. I don't know why, because you've always been able to find it before. Although I've been extra good this year, you don't have to bring me anything. But could you please bring my father a new job? He says he lost the old one. I told him I could help him find it if he knew where he lost it, but he says he didn't lose it like that. I know he must really miss it because he's very sad. My mother says you might bring us Christmas dinner. I didn't know you brought things like that, but I hope you will because she says that's all she wants for Christmas. Also, do you think you can find a bicycle for my little brother? He really needs one. I always let him borrow mine, but it has a flat tire, and my father says we can't get it fixed right now. In case you don't remember, our house is on Elm Street, and it's the one with the yellow door. I know you can find it. Thank you very much. Sally. P.S. I'm going to make cookies for you and the reindeer this year. Mom says we can't afford the Twinkies I usually leave for you. I hope you will like them.
Whoa, it just gives me a lump in my throat, Hector. It's so sad.
Yeah. We better go wake up the boss. He's gonna want to know about this one right away.
No, wait a minute. Maybe we should let him sleep. He looks so tired and all. I think we ought to take care of this one for him. Look, hey, when we came here, I thought we was gonna get to do something good, And so far, all we've done is read letters. This might be our big chance to do good, Maybe we'll even get permanent jobs here.
I don't know, Oscar. You heard what the boss said. Just read the letter and write down what the person wants. I think he's probably got a whole department here for dealing with the problem letters and all that.
Yeah, well, I say we at least go check it out, Our shift will be over in a couple of hours. What's it gonna hurt if, let's say we decide to get away from here and go to breakfast together, you know? And we just happened to end up on Elm Street, you know? And, oh, hey, there's little Sally's house. I mean, you see what I'm saying? Our elf oath says we gotta help anybody who needs it, you know? So we help out. And then, if the boss wants to help out too, hey, that'll be even better.
We can't do that. The rules say that we're not supposed to go anywhere without first getting permission from Santa himself there.
Who's gonna know?
I don't know. Tell me, wise guy, why do I get this feeling like we're about to get ourselves in trouble again?
Trust me, Hector, trust me.
And so Hector and Oscar, breaking rule number 1 at the North Pole, the rule that states that you must never break any of the other rules, headed south after their shift was over. And believe it or not, it wasn't all that difficult to do. All they did was short-circuit the procedures. Here's how it works. When you send a letter to the North Pole, it is opened and read by the elves in the mailroom, in this case Hector and Oscar. They fill out a report on what you want for Christmas and forward it to Santa Claus, who reads it and gives your name to the Naughty and Nice department. Now the Naughty and Nice department sends out elves to check up on you, to see if you really deserve what you're asking for. These elves are called spy elves, and hundreds of them head south from the North Pole every morning. So Hector and Oscar simply hid the report on Sally's letter in the huge backlog of reports awaiting Santa's approval and went to the spy shuttle depot saying that they had to visit a house on Elm Street. And easy as that, by 10 o'clock in the morning, they were sitting in a tree on Elm Street. Now this might be a good time to stop and talk a little bit about Santa's spies, and elves in general for that matter. Now I hope they don't get mad at me for telling you this, but the first thing that you have to know is that there are elves around all the time. There's probably even a few in the room that you're in right at this moment. And while I'm sure you've never met one, I can assure you that you've seen hundreds of them. You just didn't know it. You see, elves are masters of disguise. Sometimes they look like little children. Sometimes they might even look like an animal. In fact, I make it a rule to always feed any stray dog or cat that shows up at my door around Christmas, because you just never know, it could be an elf, and a little snack might go a long way towards making them forget some minor infraction of the Naughty and Nice code. Now, spy elves are very highly trained. Many of them study for years to be one, and they take great pride in the fact that not one of them has ever been spotted. I've even heard stories about one legendary elf who disguised himself as a potted plant and stood for a whole year in somebody's house taking notes. But this isn't a story about legendary spy elves. We're talking about Hector and Oscar here. And while they, like all elves, do have a knack for not being seen, there's no comparison between a couple of shoe recycling elves from Brooklyn and Santa's spies.
Okay, wise guy, here we are. Now what are we gonna do?
Well, you know, we go check out the house. You know, it must be that one over there with the yellow door.
Hey, brilliant. And how might you propose that we get from this tree here over to there without being seen?
Yeah, well, it's easy, actually. See, we're gonna wait till no one's coming, and then we make a run for it. Okay, just trust me.
Ooh, I hate it when you say that.
All right, now get ready. Now! Run!
How did I ever let you talk me into this?
I told you, piece of cake. I told you no one would see us.
Well, no one except that dog that almost bit my leg off there.
Hey, just quit your complaining and help me get up to that window so I can see in. What do we got? Whoa, Hector. There's a man in there taking their furniture away. The place is almost empty.
Well, maybe we got the wrong house here.
No. It's the right house. I can see people in there. Their furniture must have got repossessed. Or maybe they sold it to buy groceries. Oh, I heard about that sort of thing, and... Oh, that must be little Sally over there. She's crying her eyes out. Oh, this is terrible, Hector. We gotta do something.
What we gonna do is go back to the North Pole there and tell the boss right away.
No, we can't bother Santa with this. Look, we're here. Let's do something to help these poor people.
I know I ain't gonna like the answer to this. But what do you suppose we do?
Okay, here's my plan. We wait until the man who's taking the furniture away comes out, and then we're gonna...
Hector and Oscar, lacking any clever disguises, slowly made their way back to the street without being seen. which in itself was a major accomplishment, since the neighbor's dog was determined to have both of them for lunch. There was a large truck parked in front of Sally's house, so they climbed into the cab and hid behind the seat. There they waited. Before long, a man came out of the house, closed up the back of the truck, and jumped into the driver's seat. He quickly started the engine and drove away, but he had barely driven a block before Hector and Oscar made their presence known and jumped from behind the seat.
Okay, pal, pull it over nice and easy, and my friend won't hurt you.
What?
The truck driver was dumbfounded. He had never seen an elf before, let alone two, and these two were apparently hijacking his truck. They made him drive to a nearby McDonald's restaurant and dropped him off. With money for a hamburger, of course, because after all, they were elves, and elves can never be bad. Then, with no little difficulty, they drove the truck back to Sally's house, which was by now completely deserted, and when no one was looking, they put all the furniture back where it belonged. Using a little elf magic, they stocked all the cupboards with groceries, and they even decorated a Christmas tree for little Sally and her family. All in all, Hector and Oscar both felt pretty good about what they had done.
Kinda gets you right there, Hector, doesn't it?
I gotta admit it, Oscar. I think we done the right thing here. Yeah, let's get back to the workshop and get some sleep. I am beat.
Now, it would only be fair to stop here and tell you about a couple of developments in our story that at this point both Hector and Oscar were unaware. First of all, it sometimes takes several weeks for letters to reach the North Pole, and this was the case with Sally's. Shortly after she had written the letter to Santa, her father had been offered a new job, and her parents had decided to move to a nicer house on Oak Street, to be closer to the factory where he would be working now. The man whose truck Hector and Oscar had hijacked worked for a moving company, hired by Sally's father to move the family's belongings to their new house. That man had immediately reported the incident to the police, and there was now an all-points bulletin out for Hector and Oscar, although the police report had mistakenly described them as a couple of midgets. And finally, you remember that legendary spy elf I told you about earlier, the one who once disguised himself as a houseplant for a whole year? Well, it seems that he had been assigned to Sally's case several months earlier when her father first lost his job. Of course, it's no small coincidence that the father's new job is at a toy factory with heavy ties to Santa Claus. Anyway, the legendary spy elf was currently disguised as a neighbor's dog, the very same dog who had tried to chase Hector and Oscar away, and thus the whole story of Hector and Oscar's misadventure arrived back at the North Pole several hours before they did. Needless to say, Santa Claus was not happy. Here it was the day before Christmas Eve, and as if he didn't have enough to worry about, he now had a family looking for their furniture, two of his elves being hunted by the police, and who knows what else. An emergency meeting of the elf board was hurriedly called, and as soon as Hector and Oscar arrived home, they were brought into this meeting.
Why, Hector, Oscar, do come in. Please have a seat.
The two of them knew immediately that they were in trouble.
Boys, I have a small problem that maybe you can shed some light on. It seems that the family of a young girl named Sally had all their furniture stolen from a truck this morning by... let's see here. What does this police report say? Oh, yes. By a couple of midgets? I understand you were in that neighborhood today? What can you tell me about this?
I knew we was gonna get in trouble here.
Well, they was repossessing the furniture, boss. Santa, we had to do something. I mean, you should have read poor Sally's letter. Oh, it was so sad.
I thought I told you that your job was to read the letters and make a report. I've known about Sally's situation since her father was laid off. We found him a new job last week. Nobody was repossessing their furniture. They were moving to a new house.
Oh, I knew it.
Now, how do you suggest we get out of this mess?
Now, Santa wasn't really angry at Hector and Oscar, because after all, even though they had broken at least a dozen rules and made a mess of things, everything they had done with kindness and compassion in their hearts. In fact, it is this trait that makes elves one of the noblest of all creatures. So Santa decided to let them take part in the mission to undo the mess. That night, under the cover of darkness, a team consisting of 13 of Santa's top spy elves, and of course Hector and Oscar, and even Santa and his sleigh with a full complement of reindeer, moved everything from Sally's old house to her new one. Now you can well imagine the family's surprise. They had gone to sleep in sleeping bags on the floor, and when they awoke on Christmas Eve morning, they were snug in their own beds in a house completely decorated for Christmas. And in the living room, standing next to the Christmas tree, was Sally's bicycle, completely rebuilt with new tires, a custom paint job, the works. An early Christmas present from Hector and Oscar. After all elves are always good. And there you have it, another Christmas adventure from the North Pole. Now I really want to thank Santa Claus for the story, letting me tell you about his elves and all, but he wanted me to tell you that just because you know about his spies doesn't mean that you're going to be able to get away with any naughtiness this year. Because they're still out there watching you and making out their reports, so you better watch out. And I think we can all learn a lesson from Hector and Oscar. Now, of course, it's never okay to break rules, and because they did, Hector and Oscar didn't get permanent jobs at Santa's workshop. In fact, they were sent back to their regular jobs in Brooklyn with the shoe recycling project. But you know, in some ways, I can't really fault their behavior, because they decided that even if it wasn't their responsibility, they were going to help Sally and her family. Too many of us, I think, don't help people in need because we think that it is someone else's job. Unfortunately, there are so many people in need of help these days that no one, not even Santa Claus, could do a job like that. So this Christmas, get out there and do something to help. If you don't have time to be a volunteer, then help those that do by donating a toy or some food or a couple of dollars to one of the many agencies that desperately needs your help in helping others. Hector and Oscar didn't let anything stand in their way of helping, and because of that, I hear that Santa has given them a second chance. And as you listen to this tape, they are once again working at the North Pole, still as temporaries, but with hopes of landing a full-time job. Merry Christmas to all, and to all, good night.